So we're into the final track of the day at day one at truLondon, focusing on big data and recruiting. I've done some pre-work, everyone will be pleased to know, and there is a lot of debate as to what big data means. So it might be helpful if we start there and just clarify for this group what we understand to be big data. My starter for 10 is variety, velocity, and volume, in terms of the amount of data and the complexity in it. And that, I don't know if that's helpful, but that's somewhere to start in terms of what we consider big versus just data in general. Any thoughts? No pressure.
Yeah. So when we think about using the term big data, we feel silly using it for anything other than a process and a data set that have to be large and have to use like non-relational database architecture to actually process the data. So whatever data set you're working with needs to be large enough. Whatever meta data sets you're using can only be applied against that data set using the right architecture. And when you do that correctly, you can then interrogate large data sets to find non-intuitive results against data.
Okay.
Does it need to be non-intuitive?
No.
Sometimes you use it just to
prove your intuitions.
Yeah.
Good point.
It doesn't have to be non-intuitive, but the non-intuitive ones are the interesting ones. Like that's where
funny surprises.
I find with any data interrogation. So it's the same with customer research. Like when you're doing customer research and you find out something that's non-intuitive, like that, like then you've got something that's really useful. Intuitive stuff you can intuit.
So is it that, we'll get to the context in recruiting, but from a big data perspective, it seems that knowing that you have it and what you do with it are very different things. So there is a tendency to talk a lot about data analytics, and sometimes what you've gathered and what you're measuring doesn't necessarily give you valuable insight.
Sure.
So it's the insight that comes out of that. So you get the sense with lots of organisations, they're struggling with, they know they've got big data, as in they've got that volume or variety of complexity, and they worry about what to do with it. And actually, it might not be worth doing anything with it because they've not had that longer term view of what's actually driving the content coming in.
Sure. Yeah. So in the recruitment space, so you could have whether or not somebody is the right corporate fit for a company is a really difficult thing to intuit. So you could take a company, let's say you take a company like Oracle, and what you could do is you could take the schools, the companies they've worked at before, the companies they've worked at after, so you could just try to map where people have worked before and after they've worked at Oracle. And if you start to see kind of the cluster of companies where they migrated either to or from, you could guess from that perhaps somebody who's the right fit at Oracle might be the right fit at these other organizations. So you could then build a database of perhaps these 20 other organizations that have a similar environment. And again, you haven't gone to all these offices to see, like, do they play ping pong, or does everyone play chess, or you haven't done all that. But by kind of mapping career flow of all the people who have worked at Oracle, you can then use that new data set to apply against 2,000 applicants and see how they worked at any of those companies, and then use that as kind of a screen, that whether or not they might be the right company fit. So you can determine other things. Like, it might turn out that if playing chess might be half of 1% of the population, but it might be 9% of the population at Oracle, in which case you could use chess as a proxy for somebody who might be the right fit.
And isn't it about, with any kind of data as well, it's about it being dangerous in the wrong hands. So it's about who takes that and what they're going to do with it. Like you said, as opposed to making assumptions with that set of data, it's about delving deeper and using it more as a kind of stepping stone to the next research that you're doing?
It depends what kind of information you gather and how you combine it. I mean, the example is some people find it very intrusive that if I phone you and I know, oh your dog just died and apparently you're in a car crash. Well, how do you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's sometimes when you go into people's lives, I mean, it gets quite close to you. So sometimes that is dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the cool stuff is we have so much information and this handling it right, and it's not just one database. I mean, you have all the tweets, the Facebook messages, the niche blogs. You have all kinds of platforms where people are behaving differently or actually similar, and gathering interesting stuff from that. So,
Yeah.
I love it.
So,
The non-intuitive, surprising little facts.
So, but in recruitment, I mean, you run the risk that you could have you use big data to kind of build an algorithm that's used to screen candidates.
Mm-hmm.
And because every candidate is individual, there are really good people that algorithm will just dismiss. And it'll dismiss them for the wrong reasons. So you do run the risk of missing out on some really great potential candidates. Some people might also find it really hard to get a job. They will have no idea why, but it's because all the big companies are using similar type algorithms just to shortlist candidates.
What I always find fascinating is they use very small samples of data to derive what they go looking for from a big data perspective. So an organisation will say, this is our best employee based on 3 data points, and they asked 3 hiring managers and they thought they were brilliant. Then you apply that on a large scale to a large amount of data.
Sure.
That's the scary part. It's like it's the thought behind the business insight you want to get that comes back to really subjective.
Especially if you learn like they're a Republican who rides a motorcycle, who's in a domestic partnership with somebody of the same sex, and you go like, okay, now we got to go find. We got to go find those candidates.
Absolutely. Well, one thing is you could lose out on good people, or two, you just have a room of automatons that are because your parameters are so small that actually everyone will be very similar. And part of what makes them perform isn't that similarity, but it's having that science behind what you use to inform what you go looking for. That almost, I think, it makes us want to encourage organisations to look across benchmarking data across an industry, as opposed to what they consider good to be in their own organisation. Because that'll never be big data, however big they are. Because particularly for some of the roles, they're going to be quite niche anyway. In terms of the other thing that I think some of the people who are tuning in will be interested in is how organisations choose to handle the data they have themselves. So there is an element of there's a lot that you can measure. And it's the value that you get from that from a recruiting perspective, because for me the complexity comes where you can layer in performance data. So there are organisations that probably have a number of technology platforms that will give them information they can use just to understand time to competency, or some of the things beyond those 3 data points. And I think they're a bit overwhelmed with how to draw that together and make some conclusions from it. And then maybe they're worrying too much about the how, and should they worry more about what they're going to do with it? I don't know. It's a balance.
Yeah, I would say it's really even more the why. You have to determine, is this data actionable? I mean, is there a reason for me to have to mine this? And if so, what is that reason? And base it on a business outcome that you hope to achieve by going down this route with the data. What is it that you hope to unearth by putting together the profile that you're looking for and then modeling it and then placing it against the set of data that you have? There's plenty of data out there. That's not the issue. The issue is to be able to come back with a result that informs you to be able to make a decision that's going to have an impact to the business. And so, from my perspective, what I'm involved with more so is not on refining the candidates themselves, but on trying to determine what is the effectiveness of the various sourcing channels that are being used to be able to drive those candidates through the funnel a little bit further upstream. And by looking at the data, what sort of trends emerge? What are the things that perhaps we didn't think had occurred? Maybe it turns out that while a sourcing channel drives a lower overall volume of candidates into the sourcing funnel, perhaps those candidates who come through convert into hires at a far more efficient rate than other media that could be serving a high volume but are actually bad fits. That's an important learning to see, because then it allows you to reallocate the sourcing so that you're driving candidates who ultimately will convert at a higher rate. It will take fewer hours on the recruiter's part to have to go through the applications, because there's more good paper in there, and there's a higher likelihood of the candidates that they're ultimately going to put on that slate to present to the hiring manager are going to be selected by that hiring manager and will accept an offer once it's presented to them. It has a lot of implications. I think it's important for doing the mining of the data and then putting together the actionable premise is to then also be able to provide an argument for your internal stakeholder to have to his senior management to show the return on investment that comes as a result of doing this actionable event, whatever it may be. And the more that you can be able to show what is that return on that investment of time and resources towards that end, the better served you are as you go down that road. Because really, from my perspective, the promise of big data is the ability to be able to provide efficiency. And you were talking about velocity, you were talking about variety, and then you were talking about volume. I think really the promise of big data is the ability to be able to follow through on the promise of quality of hire in a way that we really haven't been able to up till now.
Yeah, no, I would say the tracking is a really essential element. So we developed some algorithms for a large UK retailer to help them identify, again, from 20,000 candidates to shortlist 1,000. And the algorithm we put together, which we thought made a lot of sense and was done in consultation, we presented them with amazing candidates who would never work at that company. So, everyone agreed when they looked at that short list of candidates. They all went, "These are great candidates," but we missed that element in building our algorithm of trying to figure out who might actually work at that company.
It was a too perfect match, but
we just had
to clean.
Well, sometimes this is my point about what you use to guide you. So if it's your stated employer brand or culture, but that is something that someone created, it's not what you live, and you build your algorithm to that, then there's a mismatch there. So it's how you do that sense check that says, in the past we've worked with banks who said we really want people from the retail sector, we want a different feel to it, and we found them, and none of them stayed.
Sure.
So actually they kind of bought into, this is a great story, I like this, and actually they got there, it was still a bank. And they didn't, it's being able to take what you know is your culture. So one of the things I think that we should consider is how a company puts their culture out there and how they recognise the kind of candidates that buy into that. Sure. So it's being able to be a bit more honest and real about these are fantastic people, and sometimes they want to change the game. So they're saying you need to look for these individuals. We know that they're not an obvious fit, but we intend to move forward in a different direction with that. But logically, the first place to start is what's it really like?
Sure.
And how do we reflect that into a strategy that says, let's make the algorithms work, acknowledging sometimes great people won't go through that.
Very often it's very difficult to actually explain in words, or actually when you're asked, what is your culture? People don't know how to answer. But if you analyze their tweets, you can see, well, they talk a lot about blah, blah, blah. Or in the Friday afternoon, they talk a lot about their referral program because it's combined with drinks. So actually by analyzing their actual behavior, not asking them, but their actual behavior and actual discussions, you get really meaningful results on how people feel, how they talk, and what words they actually use when describing something. And then you can actually use that to either change that or actually use it in your advertising or your campaigning or your copywriting, or change your job descriptions and find a good match then.
And how do you think the employees and the candidates feel about about what recruiters and what companies are doing with this big data, because I'm just wondering, like you said there, analyze and employees' tweets, look at what they're saying. It kind of feels a little bit like Big Brother is watching you, and I'm just wondering ethically how that sits with candidates and employees in general.
Actually, I think not enough companies are actually monitoring what they're doing and actually listening good enough. I think there are not enough companies actually using big data or don't know there is big data to be used.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they're still in their old process of what they're used to be doing. I mean, a recruiter in Holland, they get a job description and they advertise when they do a job posting. They don't even think about, hey, I could actually start sourcing. It's still, because they're still sort of old-fashioned in the way of thinking. And big data is, on the one hand, it's not being used, and on the other hand, we're getting more and more used to our world is online and digital. So
sure, but the
culture is changing.
Sure, we could still. So there's data that people publish publicly on the web. That gets picked up in every search engine, and anybody can find it at any time. But like in that instance, if a company is going to mine all that data and attach that to an employment record, should they just give people the heads up? That they're going to do it. I mean, I kind of feel like
you're not allowed to put a camera up in somebody's workplace, but you are allowed to.
And again, like the data is public. Anybody, like any in HR, they can just go to Google and just they can just grab all of that data. But I feel like if you are going to use, so you can just use it in aggregate. So so strip away who the individuals are just to determine what is our culture, like what is
or demographic,
what is our interest, or what channels do our employees use? Maybe we can use those channels to identify any people who might be employees. In which case, you probably don't need to give them any heads up. And in fact, if you give them the heads up, they might also change their behavior.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to. The premise is always that it's in their best interest, because if you've identified what it's like to be there and you're looking for that, if they don't fit that, they won't enjoy it. But the reality is that. Does everybody realise everything out there could be used to understand them better?
Sure.
But that, to me, if it's linked to tapping you on the shoulder, the biggest risk to the organisation is that you don't tap the right person. Actually, none of us have been offended by being called up about a job. If it's presented in the right way, it's generally flattering to have someone make that call. The interesting thing we were talking about earlier is how, when someone goes to apply online, how many of the criteria you give them visibility of straight away. So some of those killer questions, how deep could you go? And actually the contention was, if they're buried in the process, you could spend an hour and then it would still be computer says no. But I also said, well, if you have 15 questions that you have to answer up front, then they go no. Sure. Actually, how does that feel? And some of this would be very subjective mind as well. So you could have found everybody who's good plays chess. So if you ask everyone, do you play chess?
Yeah, sure.
And they go, oh no. Then so it's kind of how you use it depends on.
My favorite story on is one of the hedge funds who brought in a grandmaster chess player from Russia because they found out that a lot of candidates were listing chess because they knew the head of the hedge fund was a grandmaster chess player, and he talked in some article, like he mentioned, like we find that chess players make the best quants. So all of a sudden, every Harvard MBA, they put chess. And when they brought him in for an interview, they'd ask him about chess, and they go, "Oh yeah, no, I love playing chess." And then they go, "Meet Ivan Ilyevich, our grandmaster chess player," and would set him down to.
It's like careful what you wish for.
Job requirement.
But I think that's where I've seen organisations say, "Do you know what? We'll sponsor every university chess club." That's different. And it's that balance that says typically that's an audience we'd like to engage with and we'd like a brand ambassador involved in that versus making it a criteria. And I know there's other organisations who said all of our top performers are early starters. They like to be in the office at 8 or 7 or whatever. But when they dug deeper, that's because all their systems are slow. They take an hour to log on.
Okay, sure.
So everyone who they interviewed said, actually, I wouldn't be here then. It's just I get really annoyed with the system. So if you fix that, I'd come in at 9.
Sure, that's fine.
So it's being able to sense check against real life and know what to take from the trend. And I think that's perhaps where everyone's looking for that helpful advice that says, what constitutes a trend, and what should you do to validate beyond just running the data?
I'd like to think that even though there may be certain areas of concern with regard to data integrity and data security, that the promise of big data is to be able to provide a way for internal mobility to occur within an organization that really doesn't exist today. Many human relation management programs do not have the capability of accurately reflecting the skill sets that their employees have today. They show the skill set that the employee had probably when they were first hired. And the promise of big data is to be able to not only cross-reference the existing employees, but perhaps look at a LinkedIn or look at other sites, whether it's Stack Overflow or others, to be able to get a more current view of what those skill sets are and to see if they're appropriate for an organization. Likewise, I think that there is a certain obligation to go back to that infamous black hole and to be able to see if we can shed light on those candidates who spend their time to be able to go through the application process. Perhaps they made a slate of the interview-worthy candidates to present to a hiring manager, and perhaps among that slate they were even selected to be interviewed, but they didn't get hired. Well, those candidates have value to the organization, and the reality is that perhaps there was only one requisition that was going to be filled against that position, but there were probably 10 people who could have been hired from it. Imagine if the whole dynamic was shifted, the whole paradigm shifted, so that we looked internally within our own organizations to be able to fill those requisitions that need to be filled right away. And then the second place that we looked were for all those other candidates who have already expressed an interest in working at our organizations, and filled those positions with those candidates. And then those that weren't filled right away from those two sources, we then began to look externally, either through an employee referral program or other source. Or perhaps we pull in big data to cast a wider net through resume database licenses that they have with various job boards and others too, to be able to provide that tertiary slate of external candidates to come through. That would be a much better candidate experience. It would be a much better employee experience. And I think that it would be a more powerful way of being able to get the candidates that you want. You made a very important point too about companies being realistic about, we have the skill fit, we have the job fit, we have the company fit. How many companies have said that they want an A player to be placed in a particular position, and that's what it sounds like? They gave you a spec for an A player, when the reality is that probably a B plus or maybe a B player would have been far more effective and a better company fit for that position. And there needs to be a reality check too. How often do you get a rec to fill, and yet the hiring manager's expectations really aren't brought into play so that you really have an accurate profile to create? And so I think that when you are going to be using big data, it's important to know, what's the reality of this job? What is that cultural fit? What is that company fit? What is that hiring manager's real expectation, as opposed to the generic job description that he was forced to have to draw from the applicant tracking system? And by adding those elements in, I think that you have a much better success of being able to leverage big data to find that shortlist fast, which is really what everybody wants.
And do you think that sometimes what the aspiration is a shortlist that is unexpected? So if I was being a cynic, if you need to go out and look for a particular set of skills, in theory you can find them, and you might find the best available, not necessarily the best. So it's one of the ways that you can really leverage big data to start to present that shortlist of individuals who have 85% of what you need, and within that is the behavioural stuff, and you can train the rest. Does it allow you to start to be braver about who what good looks like in those candidates?
I would have to think that with an existing employee, you have a much better sense of the job fit and the cultural fit than you would with someone hired externally, and so that there probably is greater risk, if you will, from an external hire than an internal hire who has moved into a different position within the organization. It's interesting what you say about risk. I just have to think that the bigger risk is losing that employee who ends up leaving the organization because he has a hiring manager who refuses to allow him to move along in a career path that would be challenging and rewarding for the employee because he's grateful to have him plugged in that one spot and he doesn't want to let him go. And it would be a bigger loss to the organization to have that employee leave.
I've heard pretty often, I had this happen to me. So I was working at a company. They hired somebody externally for a role that I thought was, I would like to have done that role. Like, how come I didn't?
How many times has that happened?
I had no idea. Like when you work with a large organization, we have thousands of those people, and somebody might, could be the difference between somebody staying for 72 months instead of 36 months, and not having the cost of hire, not having the risk of they're not the right fit, and all those other elements.
And I think that goes back to having the right systems set up in place for those bigger or even the smaller organisations. It's about the assessment processes and the systems that are set up to track that, but it's also about how are you communicating internally regarding, job promotions or job changes, and how does that all filter through? Because without that, you can have your big data, but like you said there, that other piece is missing, and you're gonna really offend your existing employees.
It's how you can leverage it to tap someone on the shoulder internally. So it's when the recruitment process starts, it should always look at your internal talent. You can put some rules that say if they've been here less than 6 months, you can't tap them on the shoulder, or if they're being performance managed. But beyond that actually, if you make it proactive, the hiring manager doesn't have a good reason to stand in the way, because actually there's two things: it's tenure and performance management. Everything else is open to. The interesting thing about big data in an existing organisation is actually how much can I self-promote? So the problem is my resume is out of date. A year down the line, how does anybody know what my new set of skills are besides my close peer group? So could I have a work page, whether it's on the internet or whatever, or it's my LinkedIn, that we mine to say, actually, now you've got a skill set that we would want to tap you on the shoulder about. And then it comes back to how much do you trust the information? So how truthful is it? Does everyone have a profile? Is it only those that have put a lot of effort into it that will end up having a high potential talent conversation? So it's drawing all that back in to maintain someone's buy-in to the business. If they
isn't that's a fair system, isn't it? If you update your own profile often enough, if you do trainings, and if you actually update it as well in your HR system, whatever it is, either internally or externally, and that makes you more valuable on whatever market, internally or externally, well, it's a fair system.
So you could do that.
You get rewarded for your efforts, yeah.
So you could do that, or you could use a company like my company. And you could backfill. you can backfill all those skills for all of your employees. So we can do a couple things. So one, we could just take every employee of the company. We can map them against their current online identities and what new skills and interests they've picked up, and have those tied back to the to the HR database. You could then map that against salaries for people with those skills. So if you have somebody who's a project manager who 2 years later got Prince 2 certification, their salary probably should have, maybe their salary should have bumped to 52. They were still at 38. They're underpaid by 14, which puts them at risk. And if you had a system that could just backfill these different skills and interests against those candidates, and then flag somebody who has these skills is now incrementally more valuable. So it could be, it could be, MongoDB. It could be a development language where developers with that language or with that database are like all of a sudden worth a lot more.
When is that being used? In a due diligence to assess the value of your employees?
If you had a company with 20,000 employees, and you could then
just like a football team. I mean, the value of your football players, and we don't do that in companies yet.
We have a small company, and we started using some database architecture that is really hot and everyone's recruiting for, and people with that architecture experience are worth a lot more, and so we proactively sought to increase the pay, just because we knew these people are going to get they're going to become targets. So they learn this language working for us, and all of a sudden that new skill, which wasn't in our in-house database. So the HR people would have no
Yeah, of
idea.
course.
Like the ones who are actually tracking, benchmarking salary, you would have no idea that all of a sudden we turned we made all of our developers worth 20% more than they were previously.
Because to your point, if someone hasn't put that on a profile, we still need to know it. And this is where I do agree it's a fair process. If you're going to be proactive about your career, you'll get flagged in a different way. But there is outliers who just either don't want to or haven't engaged in that could still be vulnerable. So you're managing your risk, saying what would be the cost of acquiring this skill if this person is vulnerable due to the fact that they now have a skill set beyond anything that we are aware of. And that feels like actually risk management. When you talk about that, you all of a sudden get the kind of C-suite interested in terms of what is our strategic workforce plan, where's the risk elements to that. So a 10% increase is nothing compared to actually having to go out and replace these individuals and balance out your risk that way.
Many organizations are contracting and growing at the same time, and what a great way to be able to reassign these people who we already know are good job fits and company fits, and obviously are skill fits, but put them into a different position within the same organization and be able to do so quickly. I have an organization that I was in touch with just this past week who was asking me precisely about an IT department that they're going to be letting go, and they're very concerned about the impact in the United States of sequestration and the reduction of contracts with the federal government that could potentially happen, and how could they respond in terms of risk. And imagine leveraging big data to be able to figure out, well, if we're going to potentially lose people in this department, we could quickly reassign them to this other department.
Sure.
Because some of that comes back to your workforce architecture and that role segmentation and knowing their skill sets beyond and even beyond where they've been trained to do something else, but also simply what is their set of capabilities and how to get a snapshot of that. And it seems that when you talk about big data and some of these ideas, their organisations are a little bit overwhelmed with where to even start. So if we were to provide collective advice, is it to start with a project with a small group, with something that's manageable, and then start to see that trend through the organisation, or should you just dive into the data kind of in total?
I'd say it starts with a business focus first. I mean, everybody's still struggling, even on social media ROI. What's the value of a Facebook like? We don't know. And it's big data. Is it the big data of your current database, or is it what your people are actually saying in the outside world? It all starts with the goal of what you're trying to achieve. And then making big data small. I mean, the counterintuitive, funny things, and I think that's the biggest value, to find something you hadn't thought of.
So link it back to the business plan and almost look at your learning platforms, so things that are absolutely critical to the business and what you can then, what's intuitive about the data that you can access to do it. But I still think me saying that, this sounds a lot easier than doing it. So it's
and part of it is just a consultation process. So most of our products emerge from we go out and we talk to a lot of potential clients. We run tests for them. We then review the results of those tests with them and try to figure out what we did right, what we did wrong. And oftentimes new product ideas emerge from that. There's a compliance issue that we never thought of that then forces us to redo the product in different ways. So because the somebody on the client side won't necessarily know what you can do with data, so or what types of things could be done. So initiating that dialogue. These are some of the capabilities we have, but what are some of the challenges you have as an organization? And then the big data person can think like, well, how can we use our data to solve that issue? So.
I wanted to close off with a final question around how much should be in the public domain. And I know that's the debate that most things are these days, but there's a lot of these any organisation has a lot of rich data, but it would in a context have a lot more value because it sits within a benchmark. So do you see that some of this, what would be considered proprietary company data, is going to start to creep into the public domain over time by design, rather than just something that happens in terms of shift in culture? I didn't say it wasn't going to be a difficult question. So is a large organisation going to start to see the value of their information in a context?
I mean, in general, information property doesn't exist anymore. I mean, it's more about information gathering and sharing than having the knowledge of. I mean, you can reverse engineer almost everything.
So LinkedIn is taking all the data of all the profiles of individuals and companies and using those to map org charts for those companies that could then be used for lead gen and sales and
so is there anything proprietary anymore?
Yeah.
But like that's an example of like, it takes big data to make sense of all those individual profiles and to build them in aggregate and to determine patterns from that. Companies have determined that's okay for their individuals to create these public LinkedIn profiles, when in fact those profiles again this is our org chart, this is the parts of the vision. These are the parts of the business that we're investing in. These are the parts we're no longer investing in. These are you can then find out what CRM system they use from the skills of some of the employees. You can find out all the vendors they use, and all that information, which might be proprietary. With big data tools, you can make sense of that.
But still, you need smart people and smart tooling to actually do it. So, and that's the value we add.
It's bringing the perspective to the information, isn't it? I read an article quite recently that said actually information now it's free in general, it's in the public domain whether we like it or we don't like it.
But there's also an information overload now.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. It's narrowing the perspective, and it's bringing that I think will add the value in the future.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I've got a cerebral